This is the NES talk on energetic integrators, and my name's Peter Fraser. Welcome to my talk. We're going to go through a number of boards of diagrams which will come on to your screen, not mine, and I'm going to make a commentary on them as we go through. We're looking first of all at what is the difference between the energetic integrators and the energetic drivers. The main thing is that the drivers, which we've already covered, are very specific organ tissues. The energetic integrators cover every type of tissue in the body. Not only that, it's been found out from our matching experiments that each of these 12 compartments of the integrators actually matches with a number of different chemical elements from the periodic table. We can match them to certain compounds. And then as we increase in complexity, we get biological molecules, of which there are many, including things like proteins. Then we go on to cells, which is a bigger structure in the body. We go on to enzymes and hormones, which are again part of the chemical control system of the body. After that, we leave enzymes and hormones, we get more into structures. These are bigger things. The organ structures turned out to be incredibly important because remember what we said in the last lecture about the drivers is that the source energy goes into the tubules and circular structures of the body and energizes them. So naturally, this is going to be incredibly important in the integrators as well. And then above those structures, we get something very curious. Remember, I might have mentioned the other lecture that we don't really find inanimate things like emotions much in biology. They've chosen to leave it out. And yet it seems to me that our emotions do have energy. And it is almost as if emotion can hang in space. If somebody does something terrible, it's as if it's still there in the place where it happened. I think a lot of people are aware of that. Well, interestingly, in the energetic integrators, we can put emotions towards the end of a compartment, and then right at the very end of the compartment where it finishes, we think there's this thing called consciousness, which is perhaps we can just define it as an integrated form of who we are. So this is beginning to look very interesting. We haven't got a cure-all in the integrators, but we've certainly got a broad sweep going from the creation of the elements right up to who we are. So in other words, the integrators are very, very broad in their effect. Now we'll go on to the next diagram. I've managed to put these integrators, or just a version of them, into what I call mind maps for you to learn as practitioners. You can be a good practitioner in your own field, and you'll have to have a lot of organised knowledge to do that. Bioenergetics is different. We've reorganised the knowledge. It's a different way of organising it. It's not the same as biology and medicine. So we have to go further and even suggest that you might learn these maps simply by looking at them often or having flashcards. And we learn how to match bits of body parts and bits of hormones and enzymes to which type of infoceutical. And we use these integrators, again, I'll say it again, we use these integrators to target specific body parts, proteins, cells, hormones, enzymes, tissues, and so on, even to target certain emotions. After a lot of research, we found that the frequency spectrum, which we find in the QED field, appears to be fragmented. It's as if it's fractalized. It's got 12 different compartments in this direction. If you stack the compartments up in that direction, they're continuous. The energy flows from 1 to 12, that is from very low frequency, 0 hertz, right up to highest possible frequency, which is about 10 to the 12th hertz. It's just around the area of microwave, just before we get to heat, just before we get to light. We get to light at about 10 to the 15th hertz. So if we're very, very low, we're down in the sound region. So we're sort of going from sound to very close to light. And all of our experiments show that something happens at compartment 12 in the physical realm. That is, as far as the physicists are concerned. They don't know this, but we think the physicists one day will agree that something happens at Integrator 12. Now, what we're interested in doing to get people healthy, we want to get an energetic flow from very low right up to heat and light. That's how we define health. So the energy can flow unimpeded through the body and you feel fantastic, you feel energized. That's what we want. And remember that what we said about the drivers in the previous lecture, that some of the drivers, in particular the heart, lungs and nervous system, rely on low frequency sound to kick off the energy. Now that sound energy doesn't remain sound energy as phonons. It will transform, become different types of energy. This is in the quantum field. In the quantum field, energy can transform from one type into another. Now I'd like you to look at the fourth diagram. And this has been drawn with reference to the physics model that we've adopted from Milo Wolf. And we've tried to make it look like a standing wave in space. And it's a double wave. It's a wave that's been sliced in half and one half pushed a little forward. That's one way we can understand what's happening. We've got a central point. This is an electron. This is just one electron from your billions of electrons in your body chemical system. We've got 6 compartments in the first hemisphere, and we've got 6 more compartments in the second hemisphere, 7 to 12. We put them together and we've got something that looks very like the dual standing wave that is suggested is what the electron looks like, according to Milo Wolf. And at the central point of those, in the first 6, we've got the heart as the central point, compartments 3 and 4. 9 and 10 is the center of the second one, which is circulation. We have a standing spherical wave, and the information we can see looks a bit like interference patterns within that. So we have a standing spherical wave with the heart at the center of the first sphere and the circulation at the center of the second sphere. And we're saying that a lot of the wave is motivated by the heart and circulation put together. Now we go on to the next board. Where the two join together, we're going to get an interference area. We're going to get information occurring at that point. Now I'm going to go through all of the 12 integrator compartments, and I'm going to remind you what we have found are the bits of the body that correspond with that frequency range. Obviously, they've all got a specific frequency, very, very high, 10 to the 21st, remember? But life is too short to develop an infoceutical for each one. So we've taken the approach of correcting them in very broad groups. So the first one is Integrator Mind Map 1 for Integrator 1. We start with the prefrontal lobes. 12 cranial nerves which emerge from underneath the body of the brain and spread out. You've all learned your 12 cranial nerves, and bear in mind this compartment has all of them together. We have separate recipes you can make up for each individual nerve if needed. We've got ear, nose and throat, sensory cortex, eyes, ears, smell, touch. Then we've got autonomic nervous system, which you'll find in the horns of the spine, spinal column. Going down a little bit further, we've got all of the spinal nerves coming out both sides, and we've got spinal nerves going to the organs as well. We've got a little branch going to the bronchial membranes for Integrator 1. Bronchi are a little bit difficult because we've got 1, 5 and 11. Can you remember 1, 5 and 11 bronchi? For skin, we've got Integrator 1. Now, the main organ that appears to be in this compartment is the large bowel, and closed within the large bowel is a whole lot of soft tissue called the mesentery. That also belongs in this compartment. Nobody ever treats the mesentery, they always treat the large bowel. Large bowel's quite complex. It's got a mucous membrane and it's got a muscular coat and so on. And inside is this mesentery, a lot of circulatory tissue as well. Bear in mind that the last part of the bowel, the rectum, actually belongs in compartment 6. The rectum, anus and sigmoid colon, compartment 6. All the rest is Integrator 1. The next diagram, Integrator 2 mind map. Again, we start at the top and work down. The frontal sinuses. You have to be very specific with NES treatments of sinus. There's maxillary sinuses, there's frontal sinuses, and so the sinuses are back of the head. They're all different. The treatment of them is all different. We've got nasal cavities and trachea. This is Integrator 2, remember? We've got myocardium. Quite a lot of different integrators go to myocardium, not just one. The Chinese teaching is that all the acupuncture meridians go to the myocardium. We haven't been able to verify this. You'll find coronary artery and coronary sinus belong in this department, as well as endocardium. AV and SA nodes on the outside of the heart, part of the conduction system, belongs in Integrator 2. Then we've got the pulmonary valve inside the heart and the heart as a whole. We've got the lung tissue in compartment 2. Then the mediastinum. That's the dividing line between left and right heart. And I've got a big square. Can you see the square in your diagram saying grief? A lot of emotion collects in the lungs for various reasons. And when it starts coming out, it's called grief. But remember I said in the first lecture that a lot of emotion is stored by the heart as the succussor, if you like, as the imprinter. Remember we called it an imprinter, and it's imprinting on certain tissues. And I said a lot of memory is stored in the muscles. There's an awful lot of emotional memory stored in the lung tissue. That's something very important to remember. Now we look at what happens when we get Integrator 2 and 6 together. That means you can use Infoceutical 2 followed by Infoceutical 6 10 minutes later. You get a special effect. This is the front midline, which goes around the mouth, just around there, right down the central midline of the body, through the lungs, down through the genitals, and it curves up to the lumbar spine, about to the middle, between lumbar 2 and 3. So the mid-lumbar spine, and you can actually use that combination for people who get that kind of lumbar backache with no apparent reason. Now we've got another diagram, mind map 3, and this one will start right at the top again. We start at the atlas, which is right at the tip of the spine where the spine joins on to the cranium. And we've got a series of cervical bones, a link to the external auditory meatus, that means your ear. At the bottom of that I've got a little line coming out to the ilium and the villi of the ilium. In other words, small intestine, villi, which can get damaged quite easily, the IC valve and the appendix all belong here. You'll see further up the thyroid and parathyroid, there's a strong link to hormonal control of calcium. You see the big square with calcium written in it. Just remember thyroid, parathyroid, calcium, and you've got it. We've got the 5 lumbars and then the sacral bones which are fused. And I've got another square, Candida pleomorphs. What on earth are Candida pleomorphs? Candida is usually in the body from the moment you're born until the moment you die. But it's been decided that it can be pathological if it gets out of control. It normally lives in the large bowel. If it manages to get through the IC valve into the small intestine, you get troubles with absorption, inflammation of the small bowel. Some of these candidas can change, so they look like something different. So there's all sorts of weird things happening which aren't necessarily in the microbiology textbook. So if you wish to treat Candida, which you believe is in the small intestine, this is the integrator that is used. So this is pretty easy to remember. Just remember calcium, calcium metabolism, and the whole spine. And then you just add on a little bit and you remember about Candida and the ileum, the villi, and the small intestine. Now on the bottom of the diagram you've got in front of you, we've got integrator 3 plus 6. If you take intraceutical for 3 plus 6, 10 minutes later, we have a special effect, and this is on the back midline. It begins at the base of the nose, about here. It goes right down through the head, right down to the end of the spine. It's just a possibility for those who have an ache going right down those areas. You won't need it very often, but there you are, that's for interest. Now we look at the next diagram, which is integrator 4, mind map. Integrator 4 is a really, really interesting one because we've got the heart here, and we have to think about the energetic heart. We've got 2 hearts. We've got one in the chest, which we know about, but you don't know that there's another heart in the head. And it cuts both ways because when you actually look at the tissue in the heart in the chest, it's got a lot of neural tissue which is exactly the same as brain tissue. So we know there's a lot of communication between the heart in the head and the heart in the chest. The heart in the head is called the midbrain, which is a little structure like that, more or less right between your ears. This midbrain is responsible for all the big things that we try to fix. Blood pressure, temperature, blood sugar, navigation skills, that is not hitting the door when you walk through it, learning, memory. All of these things are pretty important. They go wrong a lot. So if you're looking at the heart in the chest, we're looking at integrator 2, aren't we? That's the physical heart in the chest. If we're looking at the communication between the heart in the head and the heart in the chest, we're looking at integrator 4. That's the best way I can explain the difference between them. So we begin with the speech area in the cortex, then the auditory area of the temporal lobe, cerebrospinal fluid in the brain and spine, substantia nigra. That really is Latin for black stuff. Then we have the midbrain, which we've spoken about, and we get the whole of the tongue. Somebody said, how do you treat somebody who's got a swollen tongue? I said straight away, integrator 4, a simple one. Whole of the tongue. And we can also put in blood plasma. That's the only part of the blood that's affected by this one. And we can go down to the bundle of His. The bundle of His is apparently the part of the brain that has the neural cells in it. We go continuing down to the nerves of the bladder. Now here, this is interesting because everybody wants to treat children who wet the bed and don't know what to do. But we know there's a psychological component, and we know that the midbrain is responsible for a lot of these regulatory processes in the body. So I haven't tried it, but as a bet, I would say look for nerves to the bladder in Integrator 4 if you're looking to see if you can match that with a person from the NES screen. Then we get the uterus and cervix and the ovaries, inner and outer parts of the ovaries, and we have to say that this looks like a female. I call them female meridians because they go specifically to female bits. This integrator gets upset all the time. We need to look at it carefully all the time for people with learning difficulties, autism. Okay, very important. And there is another factor. It's easy to upset Integrator 4. And the MMR inoculation may be part of the story. If you've been upset by an MMR inoculation, it will show up in Integrator 4, but of course you treat it with energetic terrain 0. Pleomorphs of Aspergillus niger and Escherichia coli, E. coli and Aspergillus. These are huge for those interested in pleomorphic structures in the body. You can fix them or modify them in some way by using the infoceutical for Integrator 4. This particular one also gets upset by environmental chemicals quite a lot. You'll find it goes wrong a lot with children. So I think Integrator 4 is one of my favourites because we can get some very, very nice clinical results simply by using that with the appropriate driver. Let's go on to Integrator 5 diagram, which you should now be looking at. Integrator 5 is a bit like Integrator 3. Remember Integrator 3, bones of the spine? Integrator 5, nerves of the spine. Simple. If you want to do both, you do. You want to do spine, nerves and bones, 3 plus 5, isn't it, for spinal troubles. Generally, this is a very general treatment. All right, we start at the cerebellar cortex and the pons. Pons is a Latin word meaning bridge, which you find in the brain. We do get a link with cochlear deafness here with Integrator 5. Again, we start at the atlas, cervical nerves, thoracic nerves, lumbar nerves, sacral nerves. Whole peripheral nervous system belongs here. It's so easy to remember. Peripheral nervous system, Integrator 5. And we need to remember that the discs between the bones come into Integrator 5. We get a few organs here too. I'll go through them quickly from top to bottom. Tonsils, thyroid capsule, bladder, prostate, penis. I'm saying Integrator 5 is a male type compartment because we've got the bladder, prostate and penis partly, but because if you use Integrator 5, you may be able to produce more androgen, and you can combine that with Integrator 11. 5 plus 11 is the male picture for hormones. We don't treat hormones specifically, we just make it possible for them to work better. And the females don't wish to be left out. The corresponding broad spectrum treatment for female is 4 plus 10, Integrators 4 plus 10. Again, there's one more thing. Integrator 5 is quite easy, but there's just one more thing we haven't mentioned, and that is lymph. As you know, the tonsils are basically a lymphatic organ, and there are 5 rings and so on. You know all about that. So it's not only the tonsils, but the lymph system around every organ. There's a gigantic lymph system around the liver and the bowel and so on. The lymph system around the ears. All right. All of the lymph systems of the organs, including the lymph system for the throat, which is the tonsils. And we've even got a match between T lymph and B lymph as well. And white matter is the last one. If you say, well, what part of the nerves, of the peripheral nerves, it's the white matter part of the nerve. So this is all pretty specific stuff, and to understand it you need to have some medical knowledge. There is one interesting combination. I always like to do a special combination, and with Integrator 5 you can do Integrator 5 intraceutical and then 10 minutes later take Integrator 6. That will have a special effect on the medulla oblongata. It's a little bit right at the back of the brain, older part of the brain, more primitive than us. All right, we found that all 12 compartments all go to a part of the medulla oblongata, and this is where we think you store aggressive emotions and even learned fears. So somebody who's heavily traumatized, there is a possibility that you can do something with the medulla oblongata in that way. Now, before we go on with Integrator 6, I want to just remind you what you're doing when you use an integrator. Remember, when we're using the driver, we're putting energy in to create a stronger body field so that we get better function in the body. We have to say what we think we're doing when we use an integrator. We're actually treating a frequency range which is very broad, for instance 10 to the first to 10 to the second, or 10 to the second to 10 to the third. This covers a huge amount of frequency, and we have to understand what is happening, and we have to transfer that back to molecular chemistry. Most of you understand molecular chemistry better than you understand bioenergetics. So we're saying that there are rules in space for how these biochemicals behave, how they combine and how they relate to each other. So what we're doing is we're optimizing the function of molecular chemistry in the body, and the function appears to be related to the frequency at which it occurs. All right, I hope you understand that. Integrator 6 mind map is next. You should have in front of you a picture of the brain. Remember, we said Integrator 6 affects the brain generally. Well, not quite true. It affects white matter, the thalamus, the pineal gland and the medulla. Then going down a little bit to the center of the chest, we get the thymus. Thymus, very important in childhood, is supposed to wither away in adults, but we find thymus driver comes up all the time with adults. Seems to be important in adulthood according to bioenergetics. Then we've got cerebrospinal fluid again. Here we've added in a great big dash in the diagram with cell nucleus written opposite. The cell nucleus becomes disorganized when there's severe disease like cancer, and sometimes it shows up as Integrator 6. Going further down again, we get to the kidneys. This is sometimes called the Kidney Integrator. Could have been called anything, but we've called it kidney because that's what it was called in Chinese medicine. We've got the capsules of the kidney, the glomeruli, the calyx and tubules, as well as the ureters, but not the bladder. So it's the whole kidney structure going down, but it stops at the bladder. And then we get blood plasma salts. We find a link with the general structure of the knee. Remember, the knee's pretty complicated. We're just saying as a general picture, it may affect the knee joint. And then again, remember we said that sigmoid colon to the rectum also belongs in this integrator. There's something very curious about what the kidneys do, and that is they strain out different minerals and decide to retain them or reject them. And this happens in the kidney tubules. And we found that there's a link between lithium, germanium, copper, phosphorus, zinc and cobalt to this integrator. There's another one which will interest those who are interested in the molecular biology, which you may have learnt. DHEA, estrogens, which is the precursor of estrogens and progesterone, will be found in this compartment. These, generally speaking, could say are female sex hormones. This one, when it comes up, there's a preference to treat this instead of other ones. There is a reason, and that's because the cell nucleus, according to genetics, is supposed to direct the metabolism of the cell. We find this similarly very important in bioenergetics. Let's look at the next one for Integrator 7 mind map. Integrator 7 mind map, we begin again at the top and work down to the bottom. We've got the motor cortex and grey matter in the spine and brain. In Chinese medicine, this was called the gallbladder meridian, and we've changed it and called it Integrator 7. Hasn't actually got much to do with the gallbladder, except it's one of the 6 organs that belong in this compartment, and they're all little organs. So if you can just remember 6 little organs, you're going to get a better picture. These are the stomach muscular coat, the duodenum, jejunum, the gallbladder is there, the bile ducts, and the peritoneum. So that's 6 little organs or bits of organs are here. This is sometimes called the hypochondriac's meridian. That's what we got from Chinese medicine. It's because there's something wrong with you and nobody could find out what it is. And remember, on Spike Milligan's grave, he's got this inscribed, "I told you I was sick." Well, that reminds us of Integrator 7. In Chinese medicine too, the gallbladder meridian has got a lot to do with blood, but it's the hemoglobin in the blood only. There's an interesting relationship between Integrator 7 and Integrator 4. They're like, one will affect the other. One goes up, the other goes down, like a seesaw. So if Integrator 7 won't come right, which is quite possible, try Integrator 4. Now we can trace the Integrator 7 picture down to the hips, specifically to the great trochanter. This is the bit that wears out when you get arthritic troubles there. From there we go right down to the 4th toe. I'll never forget, years ago I had this gentleman came up into my, what would I call it, my acupuncture clinic. And he said, "I have got swelling of the 4th toe." All the other toes and fingers were fine, swelling of the 4th toe. Came up like a balloon. Incredible, eh? And he wanted me to fix it. Well, I did, because we treated Integrator 7. It got it to work correctly. The toe went down again. This is Integrator 8 mind map. And we're going to look at Integrator 8 and its 2 or possibly 3 main aspects. The first aspect we should look at is endocrine control. The hypothalamus has a role in the regulation of the endocrine system, and if you look on the diagram in front of you, there's a big line going down to the gonads, the ovaries and the testes, and those are what is being regulated by this integrator. The other aspect of it is the visual aspect. We get the optic cortex, the visual interpretation center, which I think is right at the back of the brain. This is important for Integrator 8. If you've ever found a client who can't take in visual information and can't follow the plots in television, perhaps that's a bad example, but if you can't follow the plot in a good movie, well, this is because your visual interpretation isn't up to scratch. This therefore belongs in Integrator 8. The eyes, the physical function of the eyes themselves. The eyes, we can say the retina, the iris and the optic nerve are able to resonate in Integrator 8 territory. There's something we can say about the muscles around the eyes. These will belong to Integrator 7 or Integrator 11. We can also look at the liver itself. The liver itself is such a complex organ, and one of the main things it does is to produce enzymes, not just for the digestive system, but for the body as a whole. If you want to affect liver enzymes in particular, it's suggested that you use Integrator 7 and 8 together in the same treatment session, and you'll have a stronger effect. There's also the link between liver and myocardium. And I remind you again, myocardium has got lots of links from different integrators. So far as odd bugs go, mycoplasmas belong in Integrator 8. A mycoplasma appears to be simply a virus without a coat, which means it's just a piece of genetic material floating around the body. You can get these all over the body. You can get them in your head, and they can cause all sorts of odd diseases that are very hard to diagnose. There is some link between the endocrine control, again, with calcitonin, prolactin and estrogen, all of which can be affected by Integrator 8. Last of all, we need to go down to the big toe. If this one's swollen up, well, it's Integrator 8. It may be gout. But if it isn't gout and the toe is still swollen, it could be because of a malfunction of Integrator 8. Let's look at a really interesting one, Integrator 9. This one is getting a little bit difficult, right? Because it hasn't got any particular big organ that we can say, well, that's it. It looks like it's very much concerned with hormonal regulation. So if you try to remember Integrator 9, hormonal regulation, and in Chinese it was called the 3 heaters or 3 burning spaces. Doesn't mean anything to Europeans, it's best to say hormonal regulation. In the brain we get the lateral ventricles. These are great big cavities in your brain, just above each ear. We'll also find posterior pituitary and pars intermedia of pituitary. This one is going to affect metabolism so much because we get the pituitary and it's linked to the thyroid. Thyroid produces thyroxine. Thyroxine goes to the liver. The liver activates the heart. There's very complex interreactions of hormones that we don't want to know about, really. They belong to an endocrinologist, and we're just doing general treatments. So bear in mind that mood swings and pains in the heart can relate to endocrine disturbances. We don't want to fiddle around with one particular hormone because they're all interacting with each other and regulating each other. So we do a very general treatment and it should settle down. The thyroid itself, the thyroid you can treat Integrator 9, the parathyroid treat Integrator 3, and if you think calcitonin is there but it's not doing anything, you can use Integrator 8 for that. We go down, this is generally thought, the meridian is thought to end on the 4th finger. There's also a link to trigeminal nerve up here, pain in the temples, trigeminal nerve. Adrenal medulla only. If you want the adrenal cortex, it's EI10. And you use 9 and 10 together, you're going to hit the whole adrenal gland. But do you want to? There's a lot of natural therapy which consists merely of just stimulating the body and keeping it going for another week. But what we're trying to do is establish health so that you can regulate your own hormonal system and get your own energy. All right, we've got adrenal medulla, and from there we go down to vagina. So again, looks like a female meridian. It looks a very, very strong hormonal flavour of Integrator 9. So if you're just looking at your NES screen, quickly trying to assess what's going wrong, you must think endocrine hormonal as soon as you see Integrator 9. We go on to Integrator 10. Integrator 10 is another hormonal one, perhaps not quite so strongly. Midbrain connects to Integrator 10. Remember we said Integrator 4, remember the heart in the head, Integrator 4. You can use 4 and 10 together for autism, learning difficulties. There is if it comes up on the NES screen, it's a good idea to see the pattern and link it to the symptom in that person. All right, we've got the midbrain, the hypothalamus. Again, hypothalamus for endocrine regulation. The larynx and the pharynx are linked. We get the middle finger of both hands. The big message is that this is the one that links to the entire circulatory system of veins, arteries, venules, the lot. In fact, it's the biggest organ system of the body. It's got the most number of tubes and tubules of any organ. So you can imagine how important it is bioenergetically. When anything goes wrong, the circulatory system has to try to correct it. Even when a cancer starts to grow, the circulatory system has to invade the cancer. Why? It's got to bring it blood. The pylorus links to Integrator 10 as well as just the tail of the pancreas. And the big one is the adrenal cortex. The adrenal cortex produces the anti-inflammatory hormones, without which your body will become very painful very quickly. There is a link to the ovaries as well as the clitoris and vagina. Very much a female flavour here, as well as circulatory diseases of all types. There's a link too with calcium. This is because of the hypothalamus being a regulatory organ. Now we've got to look at female cycle. Female is very complex. Things go wrong. And it's because of the hormones and female cycle regulation. You can look on your screen and see if you can pick up any combination of these, 4, 6 and 10. If it's just 4 and 10 or 4 and 6, 6 and 10, any combination of those, if it matches with your client, you can then say, okay, you can take these in the same treatment session. But menopause is slightly different because we find Energetic Integrator 5 and 10 together for menopause. Integrator 11 mind map. We start at the top looking at the prefrontal lobes. Okay, remember? The prefrontal lobes for the higher brain centres, going to maxillary sinuses, the ones right next to the nose at the top of the jaw, epiglottis and esophagus. So far so good. The Integrator 11 has got a lot of aspects. So if you just think of that aspect first, the throat, epiglottis and esophagus, you've sort of got one picture of it. Now we take another little snapshot and think of the bronchi, which go wrong all the time, bronchial asthma, hay fever, chronic bronchitis. They do go wrong a lot. You often find a great number of energetic terrains living in the chest. We'll find a lot of emotions living in the chest. And I think they must be related. Because if the emotions are there, they can upset the whole compartment. Think about that. So, psychosomatic diseases generally. Think of heart and lungs a lot. But you should also think of Integrator 11, because any integrator that goes to the higher centres of the brain obviously is going to be a perfect candidate for psychosomatic or a disease with a large emotional content. Stomach mucus coat only. If you want the muscular coat of the stomach, we look at Energetic Integrator 7. The mucous membrane coat is Integrator 11. All right, you can give 7 and 11 at the same treatment session, a little apart. The hydrochloric acid production in the stomach is related in some way to Integrator 11 and the whole abdominal cavity. The muscular coat of the large bowel stores a whole lot of toxins. That's why we need to treat it. That's why when you use this integrator, you might get strong detox reactions for weeks afterwards. It's important to remember muscular coat of duodenum as well, but the stomach mucus coat is slightly different, and then the muscular coat of the large bowel. It's a male meridian. Another aspect we're talking about here, this is a hormonal aspect. The Integrator 11 is definitely male in flavour. So learn to give a preference to the male or female ones when you're choosing which integrator to use. It's a good idea. Male meridian, why do I say it's a male meridian or a male compartment or integrator? Because it matches with the vas deferens, the testes, epididymis, that's a beautiful Greek word, scrotum and the head of the penis. and I've got written in capitals testosterone. That's not all. We've already got quite a complex picture. We've got the abdominal cavity, the bronchi, the throat, psychosomatic, and then last of all, we've got the long bones. The colon energy goes along the long bones of the arms. The stomach meridian goes right across the long bones of the legs, where we have bone marrow, yellow and red. The long bones are known to absorb heavy metals. Aluminium, which is also pronounced aluminum, and we've got lead, antimony, which is also pronounced antimony, lead, and cadmium. Interesting. The long bones are there to make the cells for the immune system. Somebody with chronic immune problems, you can see what you have to do. It's a big priority to get rid of heavy metals as soon as possible after starting treatment. And so it's not surprising that Integrator 11 comes up as a priority very often. The integrator also goes to the dorsum of the foot and to the middle toe. Arthritis of the foot generally treats Integrator 11. Arthritis of the hands generally treat Integrator 1. We're going on now to the last of the pictures of the main integrators. Integrator 12 mind map. You should see some ziggy lines in your diagram which says all ionizing radiation. So long plane trips at 40,000 feet, it's a bit like space travel. There's a lot of ionizing radiation and you're not very well protected. We always suggest that you take kelp tablets before flying because it upsets Integrator 12. There's a corpus callosum. Remember, you do this cross-crawling exercise in all sorts of therapy to get integration of left and right. That's what Integrator 12 is about, integrating left and right functions. It links both cerebral hemispheres. We've got lymph in the neck, lymph in the arms, lymph in the groin. Remember, lymph and ionizing radiation, because one is going to affect the other very much. We've got special combinations here. If we use Integrator 11 and 12 together, we're going to affect both the head and the tail of the pancreas, as well as the spleen. And remember, I mean, everybody knows the spleen's affected by ionizing radiation too. That's another link. And last of all, uterus. Some people think Integrator 12 could affect the fetus inside the uterus. Don't know. It's just one of those possibilities we mention so as to advise you not to use very big doses of Integrator 12 early in pregnancy. Now we've got a really interesting one for people who want to treat the nervous system. And you've treated nerve driver and you've treated energetic star 3 and not a lot's happening, and you're trying to affect the neurolemma and the Schwann cells. This is the coating of the axons of the nervous system, which when it goes wrong, you get poor conduction of nervous messages and get MS. So we think for neural degenerative diseases like Parkinson's and MS, that Integrator 12 might be important. We say might, we don't have any clinical data, but we're saying go for it and tell us what happens. We'd be the most interested people if you could get some data on that. Now, there are certain tissues that are so complex that they want 2 integrators at once. Now, we always tell you don't mix them, but when we say 2 at once, we mean have them 10 minutes apart in the same treatment session. And some of these are really important because no one can do anything with some of these types of diseases, and we hope that we can. The first one, which is on your diagram called mixes for tissues, we've got motor neurone. Motor neurone disease is pretty awful, and there's not a lot that can be done. And we don't know, but we know that in our testing, if you use Integrators 1 and 10 together, it matches with motor neuron. We're not saying it's a cure, but try it with your client's permission. Then an interesting one for mammary tissue, for breast cancer indeed. It only connects with this sort of tissue if you use Integrator 2 and 12 in the same treatment session. There's another combination you need to remember for intervertebral discs, where this has been definitely diagnosed with X-ray and so on. For chiropractors, please remember crushed intervertebral discs, trying to get them to regenerate. You use Integrators 5 plus 6 plus 12. Same treatment session, 10 minutes apart. Ovaries are another complex one that requires special treatment. Ovaries you can use Integrator 4, Integrator 8 together. When I say ovaries, I include corpus luteum. The sphincters in the body, they're all over the place. In the bladder, in the stomach, in the throat, and so on. The sphincters go, they're just little muscle rings that open and close. For sphincters all over the body, it's Integrator 4 and 12. So again, for people who wet the bed as children, 4 and 12. What you're doing is you're looking at the NES screen and trying to match one of these to see if it's there. If it's there, it's a possibility it'll work clinically. The last one is for bones, the long bones, 6 plus 10. Integrator 6 plus 10. The cartilage on the end of the bone that goes wrong in arthritis, you can use 7 plus 12. All right, that's the end of the talk on the integrators, the 12 integrators and the combinations of the integrators. I hope you learn how to use them, and the idea, I repeat just to remind you at the end, that you look at the NES screen, you try to match with a pattern of a disease that we've mentioned, and then you try to match that again with the symptoms and complaints of your client. If you can do that, I'm sure you'll be very successful in using drivers and integrators together. Thank you very much for your attention.